So there's a lot of upsetting things going on in the world today. I don't really want to talk about that stuff directly. I want to talk about a book that made me, I guess, that I thought of because of the things that were going on in the world. So I guess some of the things I'm talking about, it's like the conflict over territory in South America between Guyana and Venezuela, the conflict that's been going on for some time between Azerbaijan and Armenia, of course the conflict in Gaza with Israel, conflict with Ukraine and Russia, the conflict with Ethiopia and Eritrea. There's some stuff going on in West Africa still with Niger. And there's more, right? All of these areas, what they have in common that doesn't really get talked about very much is that there is kind of the shadow of colonialism. I'm going to say this three different ways, but colonialism, people being exploited, other countries or territories outside of a country and territory coming in and subjugating, taking land, exploiting people, and the reverberation, the effects that has over the decades. Even within, like, for example, the conflict with Eritrea and Ethiopia, although Ethiopia is one of two countries that was never officially colonized in Africa, you could kind of get into the details with that. Parts of Ethiopia and Eritrea itself were occupied by the Italians, and that has an effect on the relationship between Eritrea and Ethiopia now. One could even argue that Eritrea was occupied by Ethiopia, the ethnic majority there. I don't know much about that. So anyone who listens to this and says, no, you don't get it. You're right, I don't get it. But I do know that these areas of the world were affected by that previous occupation. Ukraine occupied by Russia, Guyana occupied by Britain, Venezuela occupied by Spain, and so forth. So the book I'm talking about, War with the Newts, deals with this thing. It deals with the subjugation and the exploitation of kind of people. But instead of people, there are giant salamanders who turn out to be extremely intelligent. This book is surprisingly funny and surprisingly poignant. So it was written in 1937 and eventually published in English in 1937 by the Czech writer Karl Capek. I've already mentioned Karl Capek in a previous video, my Hitchbot video. He wrote the play R.U.R. Rossum's Universal Robots, and it's where we get the term robot from. So this book deals with similar themes of exploitation, but it looks at it from a different angle. It's a surprisingly funny book. It's a surprisingly entertaining book. It's a surprisingly modern book. That may be speaking more of the translators. I don't speak Czech, so I had to read it in English. But it is a very entertaining book. And it has a very interesting look at the justification that we as people, as human beings, give to exploit other people, to take advantage of other people, to use other people. And often that exploitation is justified through a superiority of nationality, of race, of ethnic group. And I think that this is a book that only a Czech could have written at the time. On one hand, he is European, and he is a white man living in the tail end of, or maybe you could argue, say, the height of European colonization. But on the other hand, he was an Eastern European, and he lived in a country that did not really participate in that European expansion of power. And in fact, there were other countries within Europe, and even to this day, other ethnic groups that looked down upon Slavs. So that's a very unique perspective, and maybe that comes out in this book. So just to kind of throw some things out there, the impact that colonization has. And this book looks more at kind of the exploitation of people, but there is definitely some colonial aspects to it. Just some fun facts for people who don't know this. The U.S. has over 12 territories, and if you live in one of these 12 territories, you do not have full suffrage. You do not have a voting representative in the House of Representatives in the U.S. So these territories, they're not just far-flung islands outside of the continental U.S. They actually include territories within the U.S. If you live in Washington, D.C., if you're one of the over 1 million inhabitants who live in Washington, D.C., you do not have a voting representative in Congress. And the justification for this, often given by sitting politicians, usually the Republican Party, is it's all different things. One, they say that Washington, D.C. isn't a real area. Somebody said it's not a real area that deserves representation because they don't have a car dealership. I'm not making that up. But underlining, without saying the quiet part completely out loud, is that these people are kind of just inferior. You won't say that, but, referring to other areas of the country that have much smaller populations, because there are states in the U.S. that have much smaller populations than Washington, D.C., for example, Wyoming, they'll say, well, the people of Wyoming are hardworking, basically implying that the people of Washington, D.C. aren't hardworking. And if you look at the demographics of Wyoming versus Washington, D.C., the racial demographics, I don't think that's a coincidence that language is used. Also, kind of an interesting fact with colonization is France, which is one of the largest country in Western Europe. And if you include all of Europe, if you even include Russia as being part of Europe, there's only two countries larger than France by area. That would be be Ukraine and Russia. So even if you say Russia is not part of Europe at all, well, Ukraine is, and it's bigger. So France is the third largest area. So it's a pretty good sized country. But 18% of France's area is outside of the continental Europe. I don't know how many people realize that. As a matter of fact, I've seen in the news where they're looking at the dispute between Guyana and Venezuela, because Americans don't know geography very well or history. We don't. It's just we don't. And they notice that there's this third Guyana down there that's spelled slightly different, but instead of being Guyana original recipe, it's French Guyana. And people are like, well, is Guyana an independent country? No. French Guyana, or Guyana, is an independent country. It used to be a British colony. It is the only English-speaking or country with English as its official language in South America. But French Guyana is not an independent country. It is a territory of France. And like I said, 18% of France's land area is territories outside of the continent. And if I remember correctly, I think France actually has territory even within North America and Canada. I may be wrong with that, but I'm pretty sure that's true. So the effects of colonization, it's one of those things, we may be done with history, but history isn't done with us sort of deals. So this book, War with the Newts, has a very, very interesting perspective. Like I said, and the thing that will jump at you just a few pages in is how funny it really is. It's a dark humor at times. It's sad. It's upsetting in parts, but it still holds this like biting satire, and I strongly recommend it. So I will give one spoiler, and if you want to stop now, this is a very, very quick spoiler, and it doesn't really give, so you can kind of, I think my camera just did something funny. Oh, that's interesting. Anyway, I'm going to keep going. A quick little spoiler is that the actual, here, I'm going to stop. You can cut off now. Here's a spoiler. The actual war that takes place is only the last 4 chapters of the book. So what it is this, it's basically this, it's 3 parts. And the 3 parts is giving these perspectives of the initial discovery of the newts and how human beings interact with them. And the actual war is a small part of the book. And it's not even really much of a war. So if you don't want to, if you're thinking, oh, this is some sci-fi epic with violence, and it's not. It's. I mean, there is some violence in the book, but that's not what it's about. It's pretty much satirical and comedic. Anyway, check it out. It's a good book, and kind of look at it in light of what's all the stuff that's going on today that are a result of, I say, essentially colonization. The colonization that took place from 1492 to more or less present day.